One of those perennial problems in fantasy is just how many powerful mages exist. It's a really important question to answer when world building because of its massive implications. If the most powerful of mages can affect weather across continents, level entire cities, and reshape reality, it makes sense to keep track of their motivations, wants, wishes, affiliations, their numbers, and their willingness to act, because all of these things affect the fate of hundreds of thousands of people across a fantasy world. But there is a more interesting version of this question. How many powerful mages have existed? Because the scars of their battles, the fruits of their innovations, and the relics of their legend should be around and be important in a world for a long time. Today, I want to look at how permanent magic shapes and changes the reality of a fantasy world, and how numerous and or useful the effects of high-level permanent magics may be on a world long after the wizard who cast the magic fades into time immemorial. As usual, I will be using D&D styled magic for our discussion so that we all have a sense of what's going on collectively, and we can all not talk past each other, but I'll be including some resources that will help you do this for all of your worlds. Permanency in modern D&D is no longer a specific spell's effect that can be applied to other magic. Instead, there are just some spells that have specific clauses, usually which allow the spell to be recast in the same location over a period of time for it to then become a permanent magical effect. And sometimes they're spells that if you maintain concentration for long enough, they have a permanent duration. There are other ways that spells can become permanent or be made permanent, but this is broadly true. So what's the big deal? Magic can make stuff, magic can have effect, and some of those stuff and some of those effects can be permanent. Surely it's not a big deal, a massive change, if whenever someone casts Wall of Stone, that Wall of Stone continues to exist. Well, I don't know about that, because Wall of Stone, the 5th level spell, permanently creates 1,000 square feet worth of solid stone wall for building bunkers, quick and dirty walls, barricades, fortifications, and rudimentary buildings. This is incredibly useful. I can see engineers of all stripes, especially civic and military engineers, in our modern world making use of this as much as they possibly could if they could cast it. And again, these walls of stone just stick around until they are destroyed either by damage or by eventual erosion. We're going to do a sort of Fermi calculation, a collection of approximations that are designed when calculated together to give a broad sense of the order of magnitude of a number of a thing that we're looking at. This will help us see just how much Wall of Stone existing affects a world. Let's say the average D&D world has 500 spellcasters capable at any one time of casting the 5th level spell, Wall of Stone. For me, this is actually quite a conservative estimate, for my world at least, but feel free to plug in the numbers differently in your own worlds to figure out just how historically important this spell would have been. We're going to say that 1/5 of these 500 are engaged at any one time in some sort of civic or military project in which Wall of Stone is useful. And that, on average, these projects require the casting of Wall of Stone once a week. Let's also say that because some of these are used militarily, that only 60% of them actually survive to the point where erosion is going to be the biggest contributing factor to their destruction, and not just being destroyed in the process of a battle. Over 1,000 years of a world, that just over 3,000 surviving walls of stone every year, that's in the range of multiple millions of castings of Wall of Stone littered across cities, civic architecture, ancient battlefields. Because yes, I bet, unlike battlefields today, where it's largely just a big open field with some corpses and random coins and pommels scattered throughout the earth, I can envision a historic D&D battlefield having multiple outcroppings of non-natural magical stone jutting out from various places to create defensive positions. Even still today, visiting a D&D style battlefield would be quite dramatic. You'd be able to see where fortifications and defensive positions were held. The thing is, if a spell is useful, it will get used. And if a spell is both useful and permanent, it sticks around and gets everywhere. Over 3 million in our base estimate. Walls of stone that still stand today after 1,000 years of D&D history. This is what we get when we take the world building concerns that come from the mechanics of the game seriously. If you like taking these world building concerns that come from the mechanics of the game seriously, then I will say this Thursday I will be doing a live stream where we're going to deep dive into the implications, the many implications of circle casting. A new feature, a new method of spell casting that allows for the extension of a variety of different factors of a spell, past what the designers had originally limited them to such an extent that I think it reshapes how magic works in specifically the world of the Forgotten Realms. My YouTube members will get the chance to watch that live stream after the fact, after it's come out. But if you want to get in on the action, join me on Thursday. Next, I want to talk about where all these mages who are making all these walls of stone are hanging out, usually. In like big mage cat towers. That's kind of the classic fantasy trope, the D&D especially fantasy trope. And as of the release of the Lost Laboratory of Qualish, there's a spell in the game's rules that facilitates exactly the creation of a mage tower. Galder's Tower is a 3rd level spell that just manifests a 2-story tower made of any suitable sturdy building material. It's up to 200 square feet of space, it's always warm and always dry, and it can be made permanent by casting it in the same space in the same configuration every day for a year. You can also add up to 6 extra stories or 600 square feet of extra space by upcasting the spell. This is an instantaneous home, laboratory, wilderness survival godsend like a bothy, research outpost or instant keep that can be maintained or dismantled at a moment's notice. But it can also be a permanent base of operations, a home. Plus, unlike Wall of Stone, it's 3rd level, which means that the potential base of casters that can cast it is far greater. Time for another calculation. This time, we're going to say that there are 10,000 people in the world at any one time who are capable of casting this particular 3rd level spell. 10,000 wizards at 5th level, somewhere in the world capable of copying down this spell into their spellbook, seems fair to me. But again, use your own numbers if you know them, and if you don't know your own numbers, do a little broad calculation of your own to get yourself in a ballpark. Now, we're only looking for towers that have been made permanent by a year's worth of casting, which is some dedication. So we're not looking for temporary towers, so we're going to assume that each of these wizards who has this very useful spell in their spellbook is only going to really need to cast it once every 20 years. Let's say as their tastes, or their power to create more stories, or their location changes. So, with a 1,000 year time frame, we are looking at 500,000 permanent wizard towers dotted around a world. Around cities, areas of natural interest, in the wilderness. That number, 500,000, is nuts. It is significantly higher, of course, than the number of wizards in the modern day that can cast this spell. 10,000, we've said. And there is something to be said for historic magic being less powerful, for historic mages being less powerful and less numerous. It is worth saying that can be factored into calculations as well. I haven't done that for this video because, frankly, that makes too many assumptions about the sort of world that we're dealing with. I feel like the 1,000 year time frame is generally fair, as most fantasy worlds go a lot further than that. But the concentration of mages probably thins out towards the start point, so it's likely to balance out roughly. So who's using all these wizards' towers that are made permanent by a wizard that's dead? Bandit hideouts, towers to be inhabited by local monsters or dragons, or city watchtowers, or the beginnings of a keep that's grown around it. You name it. In fact, I'd wager that the civic utility of an always warm, always dry, immediately furnished watchtower with up to 8 stories being summoned at the city limits is a very, very good idea, especially as its cost is essentially 10 minutes of a court mage's day every day for a year. Especially as cities tend to expand, you can keep placing watchtowers further and further out every 10-15 years with that little effort from a court mage. Honestly, I would suggest that 500,000 is probably likely an undercount, given the massive civic utility of an instantaneous watchtower in areas that you might be worried about. Because our calculation just then was it's kind of just summoning their own homes, and maybe a second home for if they want to move somewhere in the future. By the way, a spell with a similar massive civic utility is Teleportation Circle, a spell which I do have an entire video covering. Suffice it to say here that if you take every single medium to large trading hub that has ever existed in our world and put a teleportation circle in every single one of them, you have a very different looking world, a far more interconnected world from far, far earlier. Because a teleportation circle, the cost of getting that down is, yes, it's a lot of 5th level spell slots, but the actual material cost of it is less than a ship. And you can mitigate all the gold costs entirely if you do use the 9th level spell Wish to make this happen every time. It doesn't seem wise to use Wish to bypass the 50 gold cost of casting Teleportation Circle. But bypassing costs using Wish to cast the spell without material components does make more sense when the costs of those spells are larger, and when those spells are a bit higher level. Let's start to get out the big guns, and we're going to start with druids, or at least some druidic spells. Awaken simply turns a plant or a beast sapient, giving them average intelligence for a humanoid person, and oftentimes granting them the ability to speak. The spell, however, does cost 1,000 gold pieces in the form of a specific gemstone. This 1,000 gold worth component, though, is bypassable using Wish. Now, technically, awakened entities aren't permanent, but there are some species of trees that live for literally thousands of years, so I would say creating a living tree who can outlast elves and most civilizations is indeed a pretty potent use of a single spell slot. Slightly more potent, though, than Awaken is a spell that does it all. Druid Grove. This has an awkward component too, a very specific and niche component, so it makes sense to cheat out Druid Grove with Wish if that's available to you. Also, if you're not a druid, you're going to need Wish to cast a spell that is not in your spellcasting class. But Druid Grove is very useful. It creates everything from fog, which obscures the area for your enemies, grasping angry vines which target your enemies but turn into lovely soft pathways and chairs and tables for your allies. It also grants you the use of 4 awakened trees and a constant spell effect as well, which is a pretty solid extra, seeing as we just talked about how powerful Awakening is. This is another spell which, making it permanent, requires casting it every single day for a year. But these effects are undeniably useful for protecting a place in the wilds, and making an impromptu lair with included minions. Given that the Archdruid stat block is more than capable of casting Druid Grove, I think it stands to reason that any reasonably powerful Archdruid throughout history would be casting their own Druid Grove, making their own Druid Grove, or adding to an already pre-existing Druid Grove to strengthen it and maybe even expand that space. It stands to reason then that the number of Druid Groves in existence should probably be about 1 per Archdruid that has ever existed, considering some of them may establish multiple groves in their lifetime and some might just stay with a historic grove that they've been keyed into after the fact. This is of course minus the rate at which these Druid Groves can be dismantled, because these can specifically be dispelled. Painstakingly, yes, but they're not permanent physical fixtures like walls of stone or Golder's towers. You do have to dispel each individual element of the Druid Grove one at a time, which is a pain, really. But it's not really a permanent fortification and home if you can dispel it. So now we get on to the most expensive permanent world-shaping spell discussed in this video, and the one which makes the broadest possible impact on just how much stuff summoned by magic and just existing forever exists in a D&D world. We're going to talk about Mighty Fortress. On its own, this spell does a lot, arguably more than Druid Grove, because instead of adding effects to a pre-existing natural environment, the spell Mighty Fortress just summons a castle and staff and food wherever you want, as long as there's not already a building there. You get 100 unseen servants to follow the orders of anyone you designate, which could, in effect, include the firstborn children of a particular family line ad infinitum. And the fortress contains enough food to feed a banquet of 100 people every single day. If you cast it in the same space once a week for a year, it is permanent. Also, it is a proper castle as well, if a little squat, in fairness. You get 4 stubby square towers incorporated into 80-foot long walls, and a 3-storey 50 by 50 foot central keep, which comes fully furnished to the caster's desire. Now, this does have a cost. The cost of casting this 8th level spell is a diamond worth 500 gold pieces, which is also what most revival spells coming back from the dead costs. So, over the course of a year, that's 52 potential resurrections that we're missing out on. Or, you can cast it with Wish to eschew all components completely. It's an 8th level spell anyway. What's the difference between casting a 9th level or an 8th level spell, really? Especially if you get to save one of your precious, precious gems that can bring you back from the dead. The only limit to what would theoretically just be a castle creation craze is that while you're casting this spell, while you're going through that year of making it permanent by casting it every single week on the same day, you can't cast another castle elsewhere. All we really need to do to see the power of a quickly built fortress is to look at the Norman conquest of England and Wales, where rapid castle building was a key political and military tool to enforce new rule on a region, with regional barons and lords using devolved crown authority and their new defensive bastions to settle the populace into the idea that they were in charge. Now imagine you don't need an army, quarters, builders, tree felling or transportation for any materials in building this particular castle. All you need is to get one mage in position, and also your castle is ready in 1 minute and ready to feed 100 people a banquet instantly. In the early days of the Norman invasion, loyal Norman lords were gifted land in England and Wales. These lands and titles were supported by Norman castle building, and these Norman lords were expected to prove their worth in subjugating and taxing the locals for the king. Now, what better test of a new lord's loyalty and capacity in rulership is the construction of a castle on a trial period of a year? Give your newly appointed lord a free trial of castle. Is it a bad location that they've picked for their castle based on what you now know about the regional trade distribution? Are they a bad lord? Has the frontier since advanced or retreated so that this castle now is a strategically poor position militarily? Then within a year you can relocate it. Plus, the fact that you need to recast this spell in the same place 52 times means that your new lord, who's got the new castle, is getting weekly check-in visits from a powerful wizard to report nearly instantaneously on their progress. And all of this is without considering the wartime capacity of having a castle. And by the way, this is a castle which generates its own food, which with a small enough garrison, therefore, doesn't really need to worry that much about a siege or blockade. Now, in peacetime, not making a mighty castle permanent might be a great punishment for a regional noble who's failed in his first year of rulership. But not making a mighty fortress permanent in warfare is a really, really, really good strategy. Take an advanced position, build your mighty fortress there, feed that garrison, control the space, while being able to dismiss your fortified position at any point, leaving no fortifiable advantage behind to your enemy who's just taken you over. If they capture and overrun it within a year, then the fortress disappears. Of course, you can't dismiss the fortress after it's been made permanent, after it's been cast every time for that year. So it's very likely that these advanced temporary fortifications would also be supported by longer term in-place fortifications in positions that are considered to be safe for at least a year. The temporary outpost uses kind of an advanced line. Made permanent if the land gains from warfare stay permanent. Placeholder forts like these would be a feature of any military engagement that features 8th or 9th level spellcasters. And the capacity to just put up a castle in the way would be pretty well deleterious to any, say, revolutionary force gathering in an area, or minor border insurgents. I think we're going to do one more Fermi-esque calculation for Mighty Fortress. For this, we're going to assume that there are only 50 spellcasters in the world capable of the high-level magic that is a regularly cast wish at a time. Again, at least for my worlds based on D&D's core rules, that would be arguably an undercount, but we'll say 50 who are powerful, interested, and patriotic or paid enough to support frontier, colonising or nation-building projects that have need for the construction of mighty fortresses, which, to be fair, is all frontier, colonising and nation-building projects. They can all benefit from just having instant castles. It's very likely that working for a brief moment every 7 days, and indeed spending a 9th level spell slot, is a reasonable enough ask and obligation. So we can assume that the average high-level wizard will spend, let's say, approximately 30 years of their life making 8 castles every 10 years. Maybe 24 in a professional lifetime of a high-level spellcaster. That may already feel like more castles than you're going to need, but we are looking across an entire world here. Now, I am assuming that these wizards are only going to be active for about 30 years of their professional lives in this castle building project, where they're building 8 out of every 10 years. This is factoring in training and advancement and the dangers of being a wizard and the dangers of old age as well as research. So I'm saying they've got about 30 years of ability to help a specific nation building project or something like that. But assuming those piddly numbers, 50 high-level spellcasters at a time exist in a world, and they work on average for about 30 years each. That is still 40,000 castles every 1,000 years, created almost for free at points around the globe. Considering the UK, though, has a number of castles in existence which is already in the thousands, this doesn't seem like a horrifically large amount. Although, let's say you add in one enterprising lich who has himself a castle building side hustle that takes a few moments a week. Let's say this lich has been working on this project once every 7 days for 1,000 years. That's an extra 1,000 castles from spending your Friday afternoon casting one high-level spell. Fundamentally, the benefit of eternal free food, shelter, and service inside their own fortification is just too good to pass up. This spell is likely a foundational one for military purposes, civic purposes, and purposes of frontier building in any D&D world that has even a small amount of casters capable of casting 9th level spells. Plus, having these sort of 3D printed castles dotted around a world just adds so much to justifying some of the core assumptions that feel very weird about the world of D&D as it's usually portrayed. Why are there monsters holed up in some random old fortress in the woods? Well, 700 years ago, these woods were actually a key tactical point in an armed struggle. And so a mighty fortress was erected here and became permanent, despite the fact that borders have changed a lot since, so it just sits now in the middle of the woods, basically abandoned. The perennial question, who's building all those, monster-infested fortresses that player characters gain access to when they pull that correct card from the deck of many things? Well, a wizard 300 years ago actually made a mighty fortress for one of their distant descendants, who it turns out actually the player's character has been keyed in posthumously to those wards because of how the wizard set it up. How does humanoid civilization expand into harsh new territories? Or get resources for building things in places where resources just aren't there? or rebuild after one of those great disasters that regularly ravage the world. You get a mage to magic up a castle that's going to exist until it falls down with a banquet every single night. I can even see this being a fairly economical way to set up a settler commune in a far-off land. Start with a mighty fortress and have everyone live there and expand out gradually, being fed the entire time as things get harsh, and when the population expands they can start farming for themselves. You could even see this kind of settler commune as essentially not a castle owned by a specific lord, but like a hippie castle, where everyone's equal under this roof and the castle is considered shared property of all the settlers who paid this mage to make it permanent for them. So they all go along, 100 of them, travel on a ship to this place where they've asked a mage to build them a castle permanently. The castle gets built and they all share in the bounty and the glory of being fed by all of these invisible servants a fresh meal every single day while living in this brave new world. And a 20th level mage is all you need. People are paying for these things. The convenience, the massive convenience of all of the things a Mighty Fortress can provide. You can bet your bottom dollar some people will pay through the nose for this, for a castle where they want a castle to be. And free food forever. And never having to interact with a servant again. And it's a win-win because all the wizard has to do is show up, cast their wish, they expend no personal resources either, and within 52 weeks they've been paid a handsome fee, everybody's happy. So yeah, there's going to be thousands of these, if not tens or hundreds of thousands of these in a D&D world, depending on how many high level spellcasters you have. So use them. Use the Mighty Fortress. Because honestly, if every single castle begins from the same basic blueprint throughout all of history, use that. If every single castle looks the same with 4 square towers and a central keep of 50 feet by 50 feet, that's not a bug. That's a feature. That saves so much prep time. Because the easiest way to build a castle is ask a 20th level wizard. Save yourself some legwork, make your world feel more authentic. Castles look like that. And get built on later, expanded on later. But that's all we have time for today. If you want more discussion of this, get in the comments, but also pop along on Thursday where we will be discussing all of the implications of circle casting, because there are a lot of implications of circle casting which fundamentally change how magic works in Dungeons and Dragons. Don't miss it. And if you do miss it, consider joining the YouTube memberships program, where you'll get access to this and all of my previous live streams, as well as VODs. But with all that said, I've been Tom, otherwise known as the thegrungeonmaster. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video.